Hello, friends. Tom LoBianco here. It is Wednesday, September 10th. Welcome to the show. In a little bit, we're going to be going deep on the U.S. Senate races, which could decide whether Democrats retake control of the upper chamber of Congress or whether Republicans maintain their grip and some very serious power over there. But before we get to that, let's do some top headlines. First up, something that we're going to be talking about in tomorrow's show, Trump's man in India, Sergio Gore. Our colleague, 24-site news colleague, Julie Grace Brufke, reporting over on Twitter, X, whatever you call it these days, that Sergio Gore, the former head of presidential personnel nominations inside the White House, longtime Trump world figure, who has been nominated to Ambassador of India, is up for his hearing in the Senate Foreign Relations Committee tomorrow. Also up for hearing tomorrow is one-time U.S. Senate candidate and former running back Herschel Walker. He's going to the Bahamas, likely. Our second story, it's safe to eat again in Washington if you're the president and if you're a member of the administration. President Trump, Vice President J.D. Vance, and other top members of the cabinet ventured outside the White House yesterday to a popular seafood restaurant and steakhouse to dine out, to show that Washington, D.C. is safe again. You could not eat in D.C. before this. Now you can, according to the White House. This comes as the National Guard deployment of 30 days is set to end. So let's see if Big Balls gets carjacked again. Big Balls, of course, of the Doge. Our third story today, it really is that grim out there in the economy. Job market looking really bad. Turns out you can't fire your way out of reality. There are not enough statisticians to destroy over at the Bureau of Labor Statistics. The latest big revision that we've seen, according to Heather Long over at the Washington Post, longtime economics reporter, very excellent, notes that the job freeze in the U.S. started way back in the spring. So for everyone out there struggling to get a job who already knew this, yeah, guess what? The numbers now prove that we did not add 1.8 million jobs so far this year. Only 800,000, 847 to be precise. So it is that bad. All right, guys, before we dive in on the countdown, make sure you sign up over at 24site.news. Get the email every morning. I'll give you a sense of what we're going to be doing the show on. All right, this morning's email did the first part of the rundown on the U.S. Senate races that we're watching. And if you're catching us on the replay over at Political Voices Network at 8 p.m., you can tune in live on Substack at noon, catch us on the replay at 8 p.m. All right. Also, make sure to drop your comments. If you're watching us here live today on Substack, drop your comments in the chat. Producer Ian is here. He's going to collect your comments. I'll get to them at the end of the show. And if you got comments and you're catching us on YouTube over on PVN, drop your comments down in there and I'll reply to them. Folks, saw you after yesterday's show, the comments on Amy Coney Barrett, whether or not it's going to be 2 terms from Trump. I hear you. We'll have more on that. We did a show on this about 2 weeks ago. We'll get to the extra constitutionality of it, as some of you noted. January 6th, of course, not constitutional, not a peaceful transfer of power, but more on that later. Okay, today, the battle for the United States Senate. I'm going to go through the top 10 Senate races that I'm watching over here. And I want to give a big hat tip to our friends over at the Cook Political Report, Amy Walters, Jessica Taylor. They do amazing work over there. Dave Wasserman. If you're political junkies, I'm sure you know these names already. If not, you should go subscribe. They've been doing this for years and years and years, of course, named after the very famous political analyst, Charlie Cook. So They've helped to inform the top 10 races. Today, we're going to do numbers 10 through 6. Most likely to be a challenge. Could these flip? Could they flip the balance of power? Number 10. So this we're doing the countdown here. Number 10. Least likely is Virginia. Okay. And now let's, Ian, thank you for that map. Let's talk about before we dive in on the states here, let's talk about the conventional wisdom, which is powerful and rooted in some pretty hard realities. It's going to be tough for the Democrats in the Senate, less so in the House, even with the redistricting battles, some of which we've talked about already here on the show. If you look at there's an expectation Republicans might even improve their edge in the Senate. Right now, it's 53-47. Maybe they pick up an additional seat. So it's a pretty big climb for the Democrats right now. But that's not to say it's impossible. These seats that we're going to be talking about here are either open seats, potential reaches for the Democrats, places where they have tried and failed before, become fairly close to actually grabbing the brass ring. So let's start with one where they appear to be safe. Maybe Republicans could pull something off here. We're in 2026. Mark Warner in Virginia. Now, Mark Warner has been there a long time. All right. Top Democrat on the Senate Intelligence Committee. Very powerful post. Also, powerful moderate Democrat. Really meets the feel and the vibe of the Commonwealth of Virginia. All right. Former governor at one time back in 2008 was talked about quite a bit as a potential presidential candidate. Now he opted against running back then. Since then, he's been in the United States Senate, has done fairly well for himself. If you look at some previous races, let's pull up our numbers here. Last time around in Virginia, he won 56-44. That's 6 years ago in the 2020 race. Doing pretty good. Unlikely that he gets knocked out in the general election. Now, here's the caveat. So this one is a reach for the Republicans. Caveat here, okay? Oh, and let me, as I noted earlier a couple days ago, special election results down in Virginia. James Walkinshaw did, in fact, beat Stuart Whitson for that seat, the old Jerry Connolly seat up in Fairfax, the 11th district, 75-25. A romping for the Democrats, but let's throw in this caveat that it's a special election, not full bore. Okay, and still could be a pretty tight race there on the statewide elections. Big thanks again to Max Cassett, 24-Site News intern, for his help getting that research together. Look for more from the Commonwealth as we get closer to the statewide elections down there. Okay, so Warner in Virginia, 2020 results, 56% Warner, and then a 44% for Gade. He's fine. Okay. But there's a big caveat. A lot of powerful Republicans down in Virginia. Okay. If they find a good candidate, if they decide that this is something worth throwing their efforts into, if they feel comfortable about the rest of the map, could potentially turn it into a battle. Let's see. All right. Okay. Let's move down south to Big Red, Texas. Now, this is going to be a wild one. Okay. I don't know that this is a seat that flips, but oh boy, these races down there, incredible already. Really phenomenal. Really just amazing. Okay. So before we get into the 2026 battle, and I should note that we don't have any sense of who the Republican is yet, nor a good sense of who the Democrat is. This is part of the reason that Texas is so interesting this go around. Let's take a look at the numbers from last time. Okay. So Cornyn, Senator John Cornyn, longtime Senate Republican, member of Senate Republican leadership's former attorney general, is running again. He's the incumbent. Last time around, he won 53.5% to 43.9% against the Democrat Hagar. Okay, strong. That's good, especially for Cornyn, who in previous time would have been considered one of the most conservative Republicans. Now, establishment McConnell conservative, however you want to phrase that. Okay, standard bearer conservative, certainly not Trump MAGA. Okay, he's up again this time. But before we get there, let's look at two races. Let's look at Ted Cruz. Okay, Ted Cruz, 2018. Beto O'Rourke came quite close, very close. And now this was a 2018 midterm. This was a big wave for the Democrats. Very close. And Beto O'Rourke, rising star, later turned that into an upstart bid for the White House in 2020. And I should note, potentially could run again. Look at this. 2018. Ted Cruz got 50.8%. Beto O'Rourke, 48.3%. That's astounding. Okay, fast forward 6 years. Last year, 2024 presidential election. Colin Allred, former Tennessee Titans linebacker, running for the Democrats. Ted Cruz, surprisingly strong, 53% to 44.5%. All right, now what does that tell us? Texas is a lock? Probably Texas is a lock for Republicans. Probably. All right. Ted Cruz, notoriously divisive, surprisingly unpopular in his home state. Even if he is very popular among many movement conservatives nationally, still has a strong following built off of his 2016 presidential run. A lot of people still like him nationwide, but still struggling down there in Texas. Could be an opening here for the Democrats. Not going to put this in Virginia territory for the Democrats in terms of the flip side, the inverse of that. But let's say that there's some potential here. The potential here comes in what happens on the Republican side and who's selected on the Democratic side. As I mentioned earlier, big open primary here on both sides. All right. There's Ken Paxton, the Attorney General, scandal plagued, just absolutely just has been in a lot of trouble. A lot of Republicans working fiercely to keep him out. Okay. But he's very popular among conservatives down in Texas. Has the potential to knock out Cornyn. If that happens, this could open the door for Democrats. Now Colin Allred is running again. But if you're a big fan of politics, you've been watching us, you live on the interwebs, you are a victim of social media, as so many of us are. You've probably heard of somebody named James Talrico. Here's the Atlantic recently calling him Texas's Pete. Of course, that's shorthand for Pete Buttigieg. I'll take a point of personal privilege here to note that I'm old enough and have covered politics long enough to remember when people did not even know how to pronounce Pete Buttigieg's name, and that including in his home state of Indiana. I don't know how that's working in his new home state of Michigan, but his national star has risen quite well. I suspect most people know by now, to the point where the Atlantic feels comfortable headlining a story about the up-and-coming star Talrico, Texas's Pete. Here's something that he's doing, which has really astounded a lot of Democrats and turned him in sort of a heartthrob of the Democratic base right now. He's talking to people outside the bubble. He goes on Joe Rogan and talks about his religion, his faith, just absolutely stuns Rogan to the point where Rogan says this guy ought to run for president in 2028. Now, in terms of barrier busting and playing down in Texas, I don't know that you could go for a better endorsement than that. Okay, probably helps that he's right down there in Austin with Rogan. All right, there's none of this presidential negotiations, which really hurt the Harris campaign. Okay, in terms of flying down there, taking the time to get down there, whether they'll do it or not. Rogan is right down there with him in the state capitol. Talrico is on fire right now. Okay, by doing exactly what everybody said they needed to do after the big loss last year, talking to people outside the bubble, going outside the bubble. This also gets to the Pete Buttigieg analogy. All right, if you recall, back in 2017, Buttigieg built his star by going on Fox News constantly. All right, he was going on Fox when nobody else would. He would do all the town halls that he could on Fox News. The ability to talk to new people, to break through bubbles, all right, to break out of these silos, really huge. All right, now we could have Allred is in there too. And you don't want to underestimate the power of having run statewide already. And national stardom does not always translate to statewide stardom. Okay. Oftentimes it takes candidates many, many cycles to build up that name ID in order for them to actually really penetrate with voters. Okay. I'm going to throw out another X factor here in Texas. Latino voters. My friend Mike Madrid, co-founder of the Lincoln Project, who is an expert on the Latino vote. And for regular readers of 24/7 News, you've probably heard my podcast with him previously. He's been writing extensively about this, about the souring of Latino voters on Trump. Not surprising, especially with these masked federal agents ripping people off the streets, yanking them off their scooters, smashing through car windows of grandmothers, dragging them away, in some cases even deporting them to the Latin American gulag, CICOT down in El Salvador. That has, not surprisingly, really hurt perceptions of Trump and Republicans among Latinos. And that is a sizable vote down there in Texas. Okay, so that's another X factor. We'll have to get Mike back on pretty soon here to talk about that. That's for a future show. We'll go deep on that. Texas could be really interesting. I don't know if it's a get for the Democrats or not, but it's going to be an incredible race. All right. Let's move to the Heartland. Also, a state where I would note has incredible Tex-Mex food, surprisingly. Iowa. Now, I love Iowa. State Fair, incredible. Best gas station Tex-Mex you're going to find anywhere, really. Make the Dorito pie, okay, with the you go into the gas station. They got great fixings in there. All right, you can tell I've done this a few times. Just load it up, man. Just rip open that bag. Cheese, chili. You might have a heart attack. I probably need to cut back on that. This is why, they only have presidential campaigns every 4 years. All right. So we can declog our arteries after that. Joni Ernst is retiring. All right. She's done. And if you look at, so let's take a look at some of the numbers here. One of the things I like to do is I like to take a look at the comparisons of presidential versus statewide, all right, versus Senate races. Now, this is a pretty standard barometer of how folks are doing. Here's Iowa. Trump in 2024, very good. Okay, 55%, 42%, really 56, 42 over Harris. All right, let's look at how Ernst did back in 2020. Ernst, that was a presidential year she was running in. Ernst, 52%, 45% over a Democrat candidate in her reelect as an incumbent. Well, that's interesting. Probably a little tighter than it should be, actually. She announced she's retiring. All right. Now, this creates an open seat. Republicans look to be in a very good space. Donald Trump has already endorsed Ashley Hinson, longtime Iowa Republican, former newscaster. Also, I should note, and this is not just for every blonde. If you put on the glasses, kind of looks a little bit like Julie Grace. We're gonna, we'll have to do a doppelganger show to see if we can get them together in the same room. We'll get the graphics together for that next time. Julie Grace looks like senators and future senators used to get confused with Kirsten Sinema occasionally. There's a great photo of her out there. I would note not as wild as a Kirsten Sinema. It's pretty hard to achieve, but the thick rim glasses, incredible. So that probably locks it up for the Republicans. Now, the Democrats were polling pretty well against Ernst previously, within a few points. We've got some veterans there. Let's go to the Des Moines Register. Mandatory read here. Joni Ernst's exit shook up Iowa's U.S. Senate race. Here's how the candidates plan to compete by Stephen Gruber Miller, the DMR. Now let's take a look at the Josh Turek down here. Representative Josh Turk, State Rep Josh Turk, out of Council Bluffs, has done some pretty good ads so far. All right, we've got Des Moines School Board Chair and Senate candidate Jackie Norris talking about her vote for Hinson's vote in favor of the one big bill. All right, this could potentially be a reach for Democrats nationwide. I was talking with an old Democratic source about a week or two ago about this, and the way he described it to me is that Iowa on paper is the type of place where it seems like Democrats should be able to pick up a seat, make things competitive, but often just out of reach. Okay. And if you missed it, we had a good Iowa show about a week and a half ago, looking at the potential in some of those House districts. Very interesting. Surprisingly tight races out there. Okay. Now, let's go from the Midwest to the frozen Midwest. Minnesota. Minnesota's pretty interesting. Minnesota gave us Hubert Humphrey, Eugene McCarthy, Walter Mondale. This used to be the home of the pragmatic progressives, all right? The Democratic Farm Labor Party. Senator Tina Smith is Democratic Senator, DFL Senator, I should say. Tina Smith not running again. It creates quite an opening there. We have quite a field already, prospective field. Tim Walz, running mate, sitting governor, and got some chatter that even a progressive squad member, Ilhan Omar, might jump into the race. I'm going to note a few things here on Minnesota and why it's really surprising. You'll recall last year, the Trump campaign was talking about Minnesota being a new battleground, being a reach state. All right. So let's go to the numbers. Did that bear out? Get ready, guys. 51% for the Harris Walz ticket. This is Walz's home state, where he's the governor. 46.7% for Trump. It's a lot closer than you would have expected. Republicans have been very bullish on Minnesota. And this is a seat that if Democrats want any chance of taking the Senate, they have to hold on to every one of these seats. Every one of these seats where they have a retiring incumbent, where they have an endangered incumbent, and we'll be getting to a number of those in our next Senate rundown. Okay, that's pretty testy for the Democrats up there, and I'm not sure that the DNC, Ken Martin, coming from there, National Democratic Party chair Ken Martin, necessarily offsets that. As I'm sure you've seen, National Democrats have had a really hard time recently fundraising, certainly against the RNC. I think the numbers were in about 80 million pulled down for the RNC versus like 16 million for the Democrats. So not great. That's a 5-to-1 ratio. Check it out, doing math on the fly. Going to be an interesting showdown up in Minnesota, depending upon how this shakes out. All right. Let's go to another frozen section of the United States, up on the coast. Put down your lobster rolls, get out the numbers. Senator Susan Collins up again in Maine. Okay. Now, Susan Collins, super, super interesting. Moderate Republican, as I note in the tongue-in-cheek, I note in the newsletter. She's concerned. Well, it's kind of the standard throwaway line whenever something really crappy happens out of the White House. All right. She's concerned. All right. This just an endless well of concern. Okay. So the question now is, does she need to be concerned about re-election? All right. If you look at 2020 in Maine, that was a year where Democrats thought they might have a shot, and it was a good, and I would note too, a good year as a presidential year, obviously for Democrats, which would seem to help lift all boats. So let's see what the numbers are. Collins trounced her Democratic candidate Sarah Gideon 51%, 42%. That was a good showing. All right. And I'm going to say that, let's take a look here, because she generally outperforms Republicans on the ticket up there. Let's see what the statewides were in the presidential last time. Maine, Harris Walls 52%. To 45.5% for Trump Vance. Okay, so this is some perilous territory for Collins running again. All right, now the question is, will she be able to pull it off? Will she be able to hold on? I should note too, if she does run again, we're also in retirement season. I'm not saying that there's any indication that she is retiring, but Joni Ernst announced recently, this is about the time where people start announcing that, if that were to happen. All right. Something I want to point out from the numbers, and I think this is something that benefits Collins immensely and makes it harder for the Democrats, despite everything on paper. Okay. 51 to 42% win last time she ran 6 years ago. Difference of only 70,000 votes. Being a name, being present, doing constituent work, being around the state, being well known, having relationships works very well in a small New England state like Maine. This could offset national trends up there. All right. So but this is the Trump White House, and there's only so many votes she can be freed from inside the Senate to vote against the sitting president. So that's a big pickup opportunity for the Democrats. All right, guys, I'm going to wrap up our first part of the countdown here. If you got any questions, drop them. And you're here with us live on Substack now at noon. Drop them in the chat. Ian will get them over to me. If you're watching us on the replay at Political Voices Network at 8 p.m., you can drop them in the comments there, and I'll be sure to take a look at them. I don't always reply to every comment. I'm a reporter. I'm nonpartisan. I don't take sides, but I also tell the truth. I'm pretty blunt about things, right? No sugarcoating what we're living through right now. Okay. First question. Why do you think Joni Ernst decided not to run? Oh, great question. Julie Grace and I, Julie Grace, of course, is our excellent Capitol Hill reporter. She works the heck out of Congress, knows everything going on up there. We were talking about this a little while ago, and it's hard for a lot of Republicans right now being inside the U.S. Senate, especially if you're not a super MAGA Republican. Remember, Ernst comes from a time when it was the kind of the ascendant Tea Party, the young gun conservatives, Eric Cantor, Paul Ryan, really a world of conservatives that almost doesn't exist anymore. It becomes hard for those folks. I was out there in, what was that, 2 years ago, at the start of the Republican primaries, and was at her roast and ride, which featured every Republican candidate for president except Trump. Now, I should note, Trump didn't participate in any of these things. He didn't participate in debates. He refused to participate in cattle calls, basically refused to participate in much of the on-the-ground primaries, running a separate, almost conjoined Republican primary. And as it turned out, worked pretty well for him. Didn't matter, even against Ron DeSantis. All right, so Joni Ernst comes from that wing of the Ted Cruz, the old conservatives. It's pretty hard for those guys right now and trying to survive. Not a lot of fun. So, and the numbers were tight too, I would note. A lot of polling was starting to come out in Iowa showing that Democrats getting pretty close in terms of being able to pick off Ernst, which would be very surprising. A potential return to a purple Iowa of years past, of the Thom Hartmann era of Iowa. Okay, here we go. Will Republicans ever win statewide in Minnesota? Was Norm Coleman the last one? Great question. I was wondering about that before the show. I think they could. This trend, there's a couple things to consider here in Minnesota as we look at the numbers. Number one, and this is a broad trend that we need to think about, how much of these numbers that we're looking at in these states right now are one-time votes that we had in the presidential this last go around. Okay, that's very important to consider. There's sort of a novelty effect. Trump is politically speaking, a generational talent. He's also generationally hated by a large portion of the country. This is reflected, but to a core group, and especially to a lot of folks who don't routinely vote, incredibly popular in lifted turnout among low turnout voters, right? So you really had a surprise surge in a presidential. That could happen again in 2028. Now, I don't know that any of the other Republicans are able to replicate that. And you have to imagine that what the Republicans are doing right now is really trying to build out that infrastructure, really trying to cement that, and in any way, shape, or way possible. Take any dozens of extenuating circumstances on this, okay? Not least of which is how the economy is doing. If we continue with these terrible job numbers, there's been a lot of talk recently of the worst of every world. Certainly, if Trump gets his way with the Federal Reserve stagflation, it's possible he could end up leaving office looking like Jimmy Carter, which would not bode well for Republicans in Minnesota or any other state. But there has been some movement. I don't know that if you can find a Tim Pawlenty or a Norm Coleman statewide like that up in Minnesota, that might do it. It's interesting. It's an interesting battle going on there. Okay, guys, I'm going to wrap it up here. Thanks for being here. I'll see you again tomorrow at noon. Make sure sign up 24site.news. We're going to be talking about Trump's nominee for ambassador to India, Sergio Gore, whether he has the mettle to repair that relationship and try to really reestablish our important global relationships. Catch us at 8 p.m. every Monday through Friday on the Political Voices YouTube. All right, guys, we'll see you later. Cheers.